Hey, everybody, this is TJR.
And this is Robert Kinsler.
And joining us also today, of course, is Superfan.
Hello.
We want to take a moment to talk about some of the great musicians who we've lost recently. And we've lost quite a few within this week alone. The same day, Robbie Robertson. And on that same day, also singer-songwriter Rodriguez, whom I'm sure a lot of people know who Robbie Robertson is who are watching this video, but not everybody's going to know who Rodriguez is. Hopefully you might know a little more once we're done. But also today, just today, the keyboardist of the Kinks.
John Gosling.
Yes, thank you. John Gosling also passed away. Within the last, month or so, we've seen the passing of Tony Bennett, songwriter and singer Burt Bacharach, Sinead O'Connor, which Superfan and I did do a video about Sinead O'Connor, but we kind of wanted to touch on a few comments that video produced as well. But just a lot of, really great musicians. And I guess it's just something that our generation is just going to have to start getting used to.
Yeah.
That more and more of our heroes, more and more of the music that was the soundtrack of our lives, more and more of these people are going to be leaving us. And so first, I thought we should talk about Robbie Robertson, of course, obviously, such a big heavyweight as far as music. Of course, best known for his work with the band, also for his work with Bob Dylan, not to mention his solo career, and also not to mention working with Martin Scorsese, on music soundtracks. I mean,
Yeah, pretty incredible. He's one of these artists that was able to adapt and kind of move around without being buried in the shadow of his previous role or his previous art, group that he was with. I mean, many artists have not been successful in doing that. He was very successful right up until the end of his life.
Yeah, you work with Bob Dylan, and you'd think that's all people would remember you for.
Right, exactly.
But no, the band, and the amazing thing about the band, I have to admit here, a while back I did a video. I had only just recently seen the movie The Last Waltz. A lot of people were shocked on this channel to find out that I hadn't seen it yet. Superfan and I watched it together and we talked about it. And it deserves its reputation. It's easily one of the best concert films ever.
Oh yeah.
An amazing,
It really set the bar very high for other projects like that, and its shadow, still continues here in 2023. I mean, it's an enduring masterpiece, no doubt.
And of course, that film led to his relationship with Martin Scorsese, which led to him working on soundtracks with Martin Scorsese in various capacities, starting with the film Raging Bull,
right?
And and even up to the present day. So I
think one of his last interviews was for Martin Scorsese's new film.
Yeah.
It was done a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it's coming out. I think it's either coming out very soon or
I believe the title of the film, if I'm not mistaken, is Killers of the Flower Moon, right?
There you go. You got it. Because it just walked out of my head. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. And I was thinking I wanted to see that film for just a lot of different reasons, but one of them was, because, of his involvement with the music too, but also because Martin Scorsese, favorite filmmaker of mine. But I particularly if there was one thing I'd like to recommend, because we do that whenever someone passes and we talk about their music and their legacy, is we talk about recommendations. One thing I would just recommend is this one particular solo album entitled How to Become Clairvoyant. And again, when you and I were doing the Music Worth Buying show on the old channel, I talked about this album, and I forget the year of this album. It was during the 21st century, but when it came out, it did make my list of my best albums of the year. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I know a lot of people really think that first album was a masterpiece.
The first solo album, Robbie Robertson?
Yeah, the first one.
Yeah, that was a great album. I had that album.
Yeah. I understand Bono wrote a song for that album too.
Yeah, they actually performed it as a duet. It was
oh really?
Yeah, it was called Sweet Fire of Love.
Very good. Did Daniel Lanois help produce that album? Does anybody know? Because when I hear it, it has that kind of sound to it.
I believe he was involved. Just
I don't know.
Okay.
He was definitely involved in it. Yeah.
Because it has that sound. You can hear that production sound. This album sounds nothing like that, by the way. I'm not saying that's a bad album, but this sounds something like it. But just particularly for me, this one was a real favorite. I just wanted to kind of recommend that one for everybody. But
one thing I want to inject here too, TJ, is and he's among the artists, probably not the only one, but credited kind of today. The Americana music genre is huge, and it's kind of become separate from country music. He truly is one of the architects of what we know today as Americana, through that work he did with the band. I mean, when you listen to a song like Up on Cripple Creek or The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, I mean, you hear kind of, and then listen to some of Dawes' early recordings, you kind of can hear the linkage there, no problem.
Yeah,
and I'm glad he does get credit for that, and it's an enduring legacy. I don't know if you or Superfan have any thoughts on that, but I think you definitely hear his imprint on that style of music.
I would agree. He definitely deserves that credit. And you listen to a lot of Americana, and listen to any number of Americana artists, and you can definitely hear that lineage. Where obviously he was a big influence. He was a big influence on that. And if all he ever did was just write this and perform, if like say a song like The Wait,
right song.
If an artist just had that one hit single to their name, that alone is big enough. And I know that song's played to death. I know you see everybody do it, and you forget what a great song it is. You forget what a great song it is sometimes because you hear it done so often by so many other musicians. I would feel grateful if that could be my musical legacy, a song as good as that. If that's all I was known for, which I'm not known for anything musically that much. Right. But anyways, though, I know there are probably other fans who probably know the music a whole lot more, and we'd really like it if you would tell us, share your thoughts as well, and share your recommendations as far as albums and whatnot. We'd really appreciate it if you did that. The same day, of course, as Robbie Robertson passing away, we saw the passing of singer-songwriter Rodriguez. You know, of course, who Rodriguez is. I know you do because we talked about this. This is the soundtrack to the movie Searching for Sugar Man, the documentary film, which we talked about, of course.
Exactly.
Superfan and I both seen.
And that led me, probably like you, that's how I learned about Rodriguez and his legacy. I, like many Americans, probably most even, hardcore music fans, they just weren't familiar with him.
I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this video knew about Robbie Robertson, but probably didn't know about Rodriguez. Rodriguez was a singer-songwriter from Detroit, Michigan. He was the child of Mexican immigrant parents. His full name was Sixto Rodriguez, if I say it correctly. He performed under the name of Rodriguez. He recorded 2 albums, one in 1970 and one in 1971. Anybody that worked with him, the producers worked on the production of his albums, thought he was going to be huge. His albums, for whatever reason, did not sell. I mean, they did not sell. Nobody noticed them. Yeah. He was on a record label called Sussex Records. He was dropped from that record label after the second album failed. And then the rest of his life kind of became a mystery. He vanished into obscurity. But what happened is that some years later, his album started gaining significant airplay in Australia, Botswana, hopefully I've said that right, New Zealand, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. Particularly in South Africa, his albums sold in huge numbers, and his songs became adopted as anthems for the anti-apartheid movement. His music influenced the music scene there in South Africa. And he was a huge influence on the generation that was part of that movement. Reportedly, anti-apartheid activist Steve Biko, hopefully I've said that right, Superfan. I know.
Yeah.
I believe you have.
Yeah, which Peter Gabriel wrote a song about. Was also a Rodriguez fan. What happened? The film just documents 2 fans who wanted to find out whatever happened to him, because the myth that developed was that he committed suicide. And there were different versions of the story. And so they wanted to find out what happened to him. And of course, the happy ending is that they found him. And he, unbeknownst to him, all this happened on another continent with his music, and he had no clue that it had happened. He had no idea. And so I recommend, of course, I'm going to recommend the motion picture Searching for Sugar Man. It's a documentary film that won an Oscar award. I recommend that film. And I do recommend, if nothing else, of course, he's got 2 other albums. I've heard them both, but this is how I was first introduced to his music, was with the soundtrack. If nothing else, seek out this soundtrack. These are really powerful songs, just filled with emotion, so much sadness sometimes, but just the kind of sadness that you turn on and you're like, and you go, oh my gosh, I got to hear this again. I got to hear it numerous times. This is, because only in music is sadness an amazing thing that you want to keep experiencing over and over again. I found it very inspiring that he was able to see a career renaissance.
Yeah, I do too. And TJ, if I can interject, I want to recommend 3 songs by him that people, if you like myself, are not familiar, listen. He has a beautiful folk ballad titled "I Think of You." Just a gorgeous song. You'll be shocked that it was recorded more than 50 years ago. It just transcends time. Obviously, kind of his theme song, which is that haunting folk song, Sugar Man. And there's also a great, I think it may have been his first single, you might know, early Latin flavored song titled Street Boy. And I think then you get a sense of kind of where, like you said, the comparisons with Dylan, not that he sounds like Dylan, but he could be a voice of his generation.
Exactly.
And I'm glad that it took some time, but I'm glad the world did rediscover him, and he did kind of have this renaissance, like you noted.
Yeah, the song Sugar Man was how I first heard about him. Before I even heard about the movie, I got a hold of some obscure compilation CD, and I just put it in the player. The first track was this track called Sugar Man, and I heard that song, and I was just completely knocked out. A really haunting song about a junkie crying for another fix. And oh my gosh, it just took me so into the world of this person in a way that few songwriters can do. So definitely, if nothing else, seek out that song. But that hooked me, and I had to find out who is this person. And then I found out about the film, found out about the soundtrack, and went from there and listened to the albums, of course, later on. But yeah, so we want to just kind of mention that. And if you haven't heard of Rodriguez, go check that out. Go give that. Yeah, I think you'll be very glad you did. Someone that, neither of us got a chance to talk about on the channel. I did post a little thing on the community page of the channel about Tony Bennett passing away. But again, an artist that made an impressive comeback to a whole new generation in a way that blindsided everybody, including me.
And me.
Yeah. And no, go ahead.
Yeah. Couple quick stories. I interviewed him, I don't even know how many years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And it was funny. He had just got back from England the night before. He was very tired. I think we talked about 12 minutes, and he was quite the kick. But more impressive in my memory, TJ and Superfan, is I got to review Tony Bennett in 2014 in Costa Mesa, California. And boy, was I knocked out. He was just accompanied by, as I recall, a pianist. And he just dazzled me. I mean, maybe his voice wasn't what it was, like in the 60s, but he could bring those songs to life. And I'll tell you, what blew me away the most was how he ended the concert. He set aside his microphone, so he didn't have a mic. And basically the crowd had to just tune in with their ears. And he sang Fly Me to the Moon, just basically with the acoustics in the performance hall and I believe that around the time he was 88 years old. Boy, he was the real deal. I know there was a lot of marketing behind him and a lot of the music industry stuff that goes on, but he was genuinely an amazing singer. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. I saw him headline, do a show at the iTunes Festival. This iTunes Festival is being simulcast on Apple TV, and I watched a lot of artists. Tony Bennett was not on my list, really, to like someone I thought I had to see. For whatever reason, I ended up seeing it, and he was the big surprise of the whole thing for me, in that I just had this big smile on my face by the time his performance was over. I was completely, and no one was more surprised than me. I was completely knocked out by how much I enjoyed his performance. So yeah, his reputation is definitely well deserved. Also, Burt Bacharach, singer-songwriter Burt Bacharach, who, a lot of people might know him best at this point for his work with Elvis Costello. He has done some newer solo work, but you and I can both remember, and even Superfan, I think, can remember when he was the hit songwriter of the 70s for different musicians, different artists, and it was recording himself too, but just a lot of, pop hit singles that I think I have to kind of say guilty as charged that I enjoyed in my youth, in my younger years when those songs were coming out. But then as I got older and more cynical, kind of dismissed as fluff, only to reevaluate it as an adult and say, these songs are so earnest in their sweetness that we could use a lot more of this in this day and age. And I made a video about it too, where I talked about it. Yeah. So I'm not going to go on too much longer, but I just wanted to also just bring up Burt Bacharach here. I don't know if you do or anyone else does, but if you're a super fan, do. But yeah, but I just wanted to mention him real quick here.
And TJ, and I may be kind of like a broken record, but again, one of those things, the Orange County Register signed me and said, "Hey, we want you to go see Burt Bacharach." Mm-hmm. Blew me away. I mean, it was such an emotional show. Those songs he wrote, they're just so, his signature style, kind of pop, jazz, or that style. He had his imprint. His legacy was large, and I think he will be remembered. It's not like these songs are going to be forgotten. Great stuff.
What the world needs now. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Boy, we need it more than ever.
Right.
Also, of course, we saw just today as we filmed this, it was just kind of like, John Gosling, keyboardist for the Kinks.
Yeah.
He was in the band from 1970 to 1978.
Yeah.
And really played on a lot of the albums that we all think of when we think about the Kinks, and a lot of the big hits, most of the big hits that we think about when we think of the Kinks.
Right, exactly. Because I think in the 60s, at least with American audiences, we think of some of the early influential singles, but when we think about I think the Kinks became much more of an albums-oriented band in the 70s, and he performed on 10 of their, on 10 of their albums. And in reading some of the things about his passing, what struck me is, there was tributes from Ray Davies, Dave Davies, and also the drummer Mick Avery, and hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. But it sounds like John was really a stabilizing factor, because we all know it's been very well chronicled how the Davies didn't really get along that well. I mean, that's why I think the Kinks, haven't done any kind of work in recent years and didn't ever have a reunion, because they didn't like each other. But it sounds like he was very important, not only to their, like when you hear things like Celluloid Heroes, his great piano playing, but also what he meant in terms of like a stabilizing factor within the band. It sounds like he was very important, and I was sad to see that he passed away.
Every band needs one of those. The peacemaker, the person who's the peacemaker, the one who keeps the cool head and tries to keep everybody more even keeled. Every band needs one of those, it seems. I from my own experience, and I'm sure you can from your experience too. Every band needs that person, and a few times I've been lucky to have that person in the band. It wasn't me; it was someone else. But I was very grateful for them being there, because they were the person that just knew how to get everybody to see eye to eye, or see eye to eye closer than they had before, when everybody was starting to when the friction starts, and the egos and the tempers and all that. Yeah, every band needs one of those.
Exactly.
He played on some of their biggest hits, Lola, Celluloid Heroes.
Yeah.
Some of the ones that we really, you're right about the earlier 60s stuff, but the 70s is when they became known as an album band, and that's where his mark is heard. Lastly here, I'm just going to bring up Sinead O'Connor, who Superfan and I, we did make a video. We talked about her briefly. I kind of wanted to touch on some of the comments that video generated. She can be a divisive figure for some people, and we did get some divisive comments, and I wanted to touch on something about that, because I think this applies to all music artists. I want to just bring up something here. There were some commenters who said they didn't understand the fuss. After all she had was one big hit single. That's all they knew her for,
She was more than just that hit single.
Well, yeah, for someone like you who was a big fan, of course.
Yeah.
Something that I didn't say then that I want to say now is that basically, and I was, like I said, I of course know her music, of course through my relationship here with Superfan. And right now, I want to quote from a Facebook posting that a friend of mine posted that I shared to my Facebook page. He stated that the music of Sinead O'Connor came from a personal well of pain that he personally did not want to experience. And I would say the same applied for me, that the pain that she reflected in her music was just not my cup of tea. But she definitely had a fan base that identified with that well of pain that she drew from. And for that reason, they felt that her music spoke to them. And those fans didn't care about the hit singles. They could care less if she ever had a hit single in her whole life. That music communicated to them for those reasons. And the reactions that I saw, some of those reactions I saw reminded me about how my parents reacted to John Lennon's death. And if you may recall, after his tragic death, there were midnight vigils from fans at night. I remember seeing midnight vigils outside, in New York City, outside the apartment where he lived.
The Dakota.
Yeah, the Dakota, yeah. And I remember my parents, the fact that the news coverage actually went on for a few days. I remember my parents being absolutely flummoxed by this. And they were like, I don't get it. So what? He's okay. I guess was he a good singer or something? My parents came from a different generation. They didn't understand popular music.
They were more the Tony Bennett.
But yeah, in fact, Tony Bennett was probably more their generation. Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra, that was their generation. But they were like, we don't get it. Why all this fuss? They couldn't understand how much that music meant to the generation that grew up with that music. They couldn't fathom that. It was outside of their realm of experience. I can't blame them. I didn't blame them. I didn't fault them for it. They just were coming from a different generation. Even then I knew they're coming from a totally different generation, totally different experience, which is why so many people of our generation, we don't get it when people, like say if they're a part of the hip hop genre, a great artist from that genre passes away, we may not get it because that music wasn't part of our experience. And it didn't shape our lives, in the way that an artist like John Lennon shaped our lives.
Right. No, that's very well said, TJ. I entirely agree with you. And yeah.
And I just wanted to say that about. Go ahead.
At least we have the sense to recognize that. But yeah, you're right.
But I just wanted to mention that in regards to and in regards to any artist, I bring it up. I bring Sinead O'Connor up because this was a recent example where some commenters said, I don't understand it. I don't get it. She had one hit single. And that's because you weren't part of the fan base that felt that music spoke to them. And always remember that with any music artist is what I would say, that just because you don't get a certain genre of music, like I don't claim to get hip hop, but I do know that it is a worldwide phenomenon that has affected the lives of millions, and that music, there is music by a lot of really influential artists in the genre that have affected these people's lives, in the same way that, John Lennon or David Bowie or Freddie Mercury has affected our lives. And always bear that in mind. Always think about that and try to kind of be a little bit more objective when you look at these things. And, with all music artists. So I just wanted to
maybe take some time and try and find out what you're not understanding too.
What it might have meant to them, how it might have communicated. And I wasn't going to try to even explain my parents, John Lennon to them or the Beatles. I wasn't even going to try to explain it to them. It's just like, I knew it was useless at the time. Decades later, I would expose my mother to certain Beatles songs, and she ended up loving them. And some of them even brought her to tears.
Wow.
In a good way. So like I said, but at the time, 1980, when John Lennon was tragically, when we tragically lost him, their experience, they just couldn't understand, what that was about. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up. Go ahead.
I was going to say too, I was genuinely kind of flabbergasted by that comment she only had one hit single when, from my point of view, where I was, the first album did really well, and
which didn't have that song on it.
No,
yeah,
it didn't.
Yeah,
and I think it had Mandinka and some other songs that got a fair amount of airplay.
But for whatever reason, they didn't continue to get airplay, which is, Robert and I both discussed that there are bands and artists who had been hit singles, but for whatever reason, that hit single didn't continue as the decade followed.
They dropped off. I mean, really quick, totally far field, but a good friend of mine was lead singer of Altered State. They had this big song in the early 90s called Ghost Beside My Bed, or I believe was the title of it. It was really big in Southern California. The album there was a music video, but for whatever reason, radio over time, rock radio just stopped playing it and it disappeared.
Yeah.
That's again what you're saying. And some songs endure and some don't.
Some don't, yeah. But I just want to bring that up. And just also with all this talk about losing so many great musicians, and we're going to, of course, be seeing more of it. One bit of good news: Andy Taylor, the lead guitarist of Duran Duran and Power Station, and who put out a really darn good solo album too. I wish he could have done more. Things are looking pretty bleak for him, but there's been some new news that he's working with some new therapy, and that he is. Everybody, keep your fingers crossed, expecting that this new treatment might keep him going for another 5 or 6 years. When it's looking like he may not even make it through the year.
Yeah, it sounded really bleak, like stage
standard of living too.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, some good. I just want to bring that up because that's some good news.
Yeah. And let me one more thing is while we're on the subject, I have to tell everyone, Lucinda Williams, she survived a really terrible stroke a few years back. She's considered one of the greatest living female songwriters by far. She primarily writes her songs on guitar. Well, because of her stroke, she hasn't really been able to play guitar well. She's issued a new album where she had some other writers helping her. It is brilliant. I reviewed it recently, and that's another good, and it sounds like she's making a recovery. So there are some good things out there. So amidst kind of the sadness, hopefully we get some more good stories like Andy Taylor and like Lucinda Williams.
Yeah, I hope so too. Anyways, thanks so much for joining us here, Robert. Thank you, Superfan. And everybody, we've talked about a lot of different artists. Please share your thoughts. If there's anyone that we didn't get to talk about, please talk about them in the comments. Please share your thoughts. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. And we hope you all stay safe and healthy. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.